Hello newscasters from the White House. It is 6:30 in the evening UK time right now, lunchtime here in Washington. We've just had the tete-a-tete, as they call it diplomatically. All of us reporters bundled into the Oval Office, firing questions at the President and the Prime Minister. I asked a couple of questions of the President, and now we're all queuing up. We're about to go into a different part of the White House for a news conference that the Prime Minister and the President will hold after the private discussions that are going on right now as I talk to you between the Prime Minister, the President and their delegations. I'm going to be a bit tied up, so I'll leave you in the hands of the others. Welcome to this edition of Newscast.
Newscast.
Newscast from the BBC.
Hello, it's James in the studio.
And it's Lyse in the studio.
And it's another James in the studio.
And it's the only Nick in the studio.
Yes, and after all the build-up, it has finally happened. President Trump and the Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer have met in the White House. So much to talk about, starting with Sir Keir turning up with a gift for the President.
So this is a very special letter. I think the last state visit was a tremendous success.
It was.
His Majesty the King wants to make this even better than that. So this is truly historic, an unprecedented second state visit, and he wants to talk that through with you.
And that says at Windsor. That's
Yes.
really something.
Yes. What I haven't got yet is your answer. I do need to.
The answer is yes.
There you go. The President, that is, has agreed that he will attend a second state visit to the UK. James, how unusual is that?
Yeah, no, it is unusual. But, you know, it's fairly expected. I mean, you know, if you think about it, what have we got to offer? We've got to offer, you know, the diplomats call it about playing the king. You know, they like sort of, you know, card game sort of analogies. And this is what they've done. They've played the king. They know how much it makes a difference and how important it is to Mr. Trump. You know, they know, you know, I mean, I would have been surprised perhaps if they'd thrown in another Scottish golf course or something like that. That might have been excessive. But I think another state visit, I think the really interesting question is, where does he go on the state visit? Because the last time a US president stayed in Balmoral in Scotland or you have to go all the way back to Eisenhower. And that was a very, very brief, you know, unofficial, not a state visit, because the royal family gave Eisenhower a little sort of, I don't think it was quite a croft. It was like a little sort of holiday home as a sort of thank you for his wartime service. And he came on holiday there once to Scotland. And so, in other words, you have to go quite a long way back. For this kind of thing. So I think that, you know, I mean, look, it clearly worked. You saw how excited Mr. Trump was.
Well, it was very much in the royal tradition, because here you are coming with a gift from the king to the man who loves himself, being presented as a king. That, you know, that fake Time magazine cover with King Trump, and he put it on his Trump Truth Social because he obviously loved it, from the king to the king.
I mean, it was interesting. I was talking on Newsnight last night. I was saying, you know, what can Keir Starmer put on the table that will really improve the atmosphere after announcing that he was increasing defence spending? I said, of course, it's got to be a state visit invitation from the King to Donald Trump. And that's exactly what happened. It is interesting that the Prime Minister was laying it on really thick. That point that James was making, unprecedented, the Prime Minister said, to have a second state visit. That hasn't happened before. Very excited about that. But it will be quite interesting how the conversation between the two heads of state will go, because, of course, Donald Trump is the head of state in the United States. And I choose my words carefully because I'm sitting opposite the most famous Canadian working in the United Kingdom.
Since Mark Carney left.
Donald Trump would also like to be head of state of Canada, because he wants Canada to be the 51st state of the United States, which would mean that he would be head of state of Canada. Now, let me just work out who is the current head of state of Canada. That would be King Charles III. So that might be a little awkward moment were that to be mentioned.
Also, we're talking about what the King might discuss with President Trump, but there's quite a lot to talk about what Sir Keir Starmer has talked about already with the President. What did we all make of the power dynamic between these two? First of all, the body language, how did the thing go?
See, I wouldn't use power dynamic. This was highly personalize. That question, for example, someone rightfully asked, well, what do you two have in common? Very different political leanings, very different personality. One trusts Vladimir Putin, the other doesn't trust him an inch. What does President Trump say? We both love our country. You can't, the lowest common denominator. But it did show, though, how that is part of President Trump as well. He wanted to show just how strong his relationship, how warm his relationship was with the Prime Minister of Great Britain. He talked endlessly about this special relationship going back so long, years and years and years. And you really got the signal from President Trump. He called Keir Starmer a very nice guy. So he didn't find anything wrong to say.
But, James, isn't the cold, hard truth of the matter here that what was actually on display is an asymmetric relationship between one country that is way more powerful than the other, and that Keir Starmer was the one desperate for this to go well and proffering gifts? Isn't it a reminder of the UK's place in the world versus the...
Yeah, and I don't think we should be too shocked by that. The UK is a small country in Europe compared to, a superpower on the other side of the Atlantic. And that's just the obvious statement of fact. So, yes, Sir Keir Starmer was the supplicant. He was the visiting dignitary laying tribute before the feet of the great emperor. And I think for all the mood music, which was good, and there were no rows and there were no snubs, on the substance, what Donald Trump said was very bad news for Keir Starmer. Keir Starmer's chief sort of aim in this meeting is to try and convince Donald Trump that the United States has to be involved in securing the future security of Ukraine after any kind of peace deal. And on that, Donald Trump gave very, very little ground at all. In actual fact, he reinforced his argument against it by saying several things. First of all, he trusts Vladimir Putin. He said it repeatedly. He trusts Vladimir Putin. He's known him for many years. He says he's not going to violate the deal once we've got a deal. That is Donald Trump's actual opinion. It's not a loose remark. It's not something that he can say about dictators and they walk back. Secondly, he said, look, there are two separate processes here, and the sequencing is really important. He said, you get a ceasefire. That's the important bit. That's the hard bit. Only then do you start talking about security guarantees. And he said, that's the easy bit. I'm looking forward to having those kind of conversations. Now, if you are European, if you are Ukrainian, absolutely not. Those are integral to the same process. You cannot have a deal without making sure it's going to be guaranteed in the future. And then his own killer argument is he sees any backstop, the great backstop phrase, as economic, not military.
What do we mean by a backstop?
In other words, he believes that once he does a minerals deal with the Ukrainians, we're expecting that to be signed off when Mr. Zelensky is in town in Washington. At that point, Mr. Trump is assuming there are going to be floods of American mining workers and others spreading out across what's left of Ukraine, and that fact itself will deter Russian aggression. That is not the view of European policymakers.
But I would differ on some of that. My dear respected colleague, yes, of course, in the first term, now in the second term, President Trump does not hide his admiration and his trust of Vladimir Putin. But on some of these issues, he has definitely moved in terms of his language. You remember the shock when the U.S. Defense Secretary came out and the Ukrainians told NATO, forget it. It's not realistic to think that Ukraine can join NATO. President Trump emphasized that again. It's not realistic that Ukraine can go back to pre-2014 when Russia first invaded. This time, President Trump is now talking, yes, we're going to try to get that territory back. We're going to try to do it. We'll get us back as much as we can. We get back as much as we can.
That's because he has a fundamental misunderstanding that he thinks this is all about territory. And yet for the Europeans and the Brits and others, it is all about ensuring the future sovereignty of what is left of Ukraine. In other words, its ability to make its own decisions. Whereas Trump is seeing it through the prism of a property deal and land and territory. And yet, all sides know there is going to be some really uncomfortable deal on terror.
No, but let me just make one point. Is that there is, I remember at the Munich Security Conference where you had Vice President Vance, you had other senior Americans there. And the view of most people was that they were making it up as they go along. And this is what you sense with President Trump. He was asked today about would he come to the aid of British troops if they come under fire. Then he went on, he goes, of course, we're always going to back.
Well, he did and he didn't, though, Lyse,
yes,
because
but then also, he's also using this word, which you probably never heard of before, backstop. He said, well, what is a backstop? What do you mean by a backstop? And then he says, well, we'd be digging. So yes, he does see it in economic terms, but you get the sense that he is now in Munich at the Munich Security Conference. The Europeans were told, you will not be at the table. Yeah. Now they seem to be understanding they will be at the table.
Nick, just one word on, and then Nick, I'd like to hear your take on all of this. But just the one thing, just to clear up the section about whether or not the British could rely on American help on the ground, say there were British troops in Ukraine as peacekeepers. He did the very Trumpian, ambiguous thing. So he kept saying, oh, the British are great. They don't need much help. Your country's great, isn't it? Eventually said, in quite general terms, of course we would always come to the aid of the Brits if we had to. I didn't take that as a direct commitment to American boots on the ground in Ukraine at all.
But he didn't say no.
He didn't say, I agree. I totally agree with you, Lyse. Nick, what do you think?
Shall I enter the great debate of our time, which is the Lyse James debate, which has been conducted very, very politely, if I may say. So
respectfully.
Very respectfully, if I may say so.
In the Trump-Starmer tradition.
That's the newscast way.
Yes. But we need to see today's meeting in the context of a joint effort by Emmanuel Macron and Keir Starmer. They have been working hand in glove. For the last 10 days, they have been talking every single day. And what they want to land, the message they want to land, are security guarantees for Ukraine after a peace deal and a backstop. And on the substance on that, I'm going to incline in the James direction. What do they mean by that? What they mean is that the security guarantees would be provided principally in Ukraine by France and the United Kingdom, plus some other European nations, 30,000 troops on the ground if there is a peace deal. The backstop they would like from the United States is outside Ukraine. It's above Ukraine. It's air cover. It's satellites. It's firepower around Ukraine. And crucially, because you'd have forces from neighbouring countries, from the Baltic countries, from Poland, going into Ukraine under this, what we would like is for the United States to bolster its troops that are already in Europe, move troops from Germany to Poland to the Baltic states to make up for those troops that are in Ukraine. And it looks like Donald Trump is nowhere near that. His idea of a backstop is we will have great American companies in there taking the minerals. That's your security guarantee. And our view is that having a bunch of businesses in Ukraine is no good against Vladimir Putin, who, as Keir Starmer said on the plane, coming over, if we don't get a proper security guarantee, he will come again.
Right, quite a lot of other bits and pieces to discuss. And look, let's not get ahead of ourselves. They were going into their meeting. We're talking as if it's all done. This was the bit at the start where the cameras get to usually a couple of minutes. And with President Trump, you always get much longer because he seems to love taking the questions at the start. They were only going into their meeting, and later there will be a press conference after we've recorded this. So let's just be clear, we're not quite there yet. However, let's listen to one of the moments that so far at least feels, at least to me, I don't know if you'll all agree, perhaps one of the most jaw-dropping moments, which came from a question asked by our very own Chris Mason.
Mr. President, do you still think that Mr. Zelensky is a dictator?
Did I say that? I can't believe I said that. Next question.
Do you still think President Zelensky is a dictator? And he says, did I say that? I can't believe I said that. Well, fact check, he did say it. He said, a dictator without elections, Zelensky better move fast or he's not going to have a country left. What did we all think of that?
I think, you know, that criticism they make about us, which of course is shocking, where they say journalists always believe the last person they spoke to. Remember those old days when they used to say, that was before fact checking. Maybe President Trump has a bit of that after talking to Vladimir Putin. It was all about Zelensky, the dictator. Zelensky needs to have elections. It was very much the Kremlin talking points. Now he's had a meeting with President Macron. He's about to go into a meeting with Sir Keir Starmer. And suddenly he's rolling back. For me, that press conference, a lot of it was about rolling back and rolling forward with new ideas. Notwithstanding, I agree with these two gentlemen. On the main point, he still has a very worrying perspective for European and for Ukrainian nation.
I think what it illustrated is the correct strategy of Keir Starmer and the British government not to get involved in those kind of slagging matches between various people and loose, because of the entire possibility that they could be walked back and about to turn, as we've just seen on the. So it confirmed that strategy of just stay out of that kind of.
Well, not get involved in a slagging match, but the Zelensky dictator line was the absolute turning point for Downing Street, because it was at that moment they decided to do two things. One, as you say, James, not get into a slanging match, but two, absolutely make clear that is not our view. And what did Keir Starmer do? He had a conversation with President Zelensky, came back and said he's the duly elected president of Ukraine, and it's quite right that they're not holding elections because there's a war going on, just as we didn't hold any elections in this country between 1935 and 1945.
But the crucial point was he didn't go on telly and do this. He did it in a low-key Downing Street email, press release, readout of the conversation he's had with Mr. Zelensky. Normally, as we all know, these emails tend to be fairly bland. They tend not to provide that much news. This is one of those rare ones that did. In other words, the reproof was sotto voce.
But it does interestingly raise the point about whether is Donald Trump possibly wholly briefed in these areas, because the other day he said with great confidence that Vladimir Putin would be absolutely delighted to have European troops on the soil of Ukraine. Sergei Lavrov came out, I think it was 2 days ago, said absolutely no way.
But that wasn't the question of briefing. President Trump said he had personally had that assurance from President Putin, which is, I mean, who knows? Who knows? We weren't. It'd be great to have a recording of that meeting, and then we could all be a lot wiser about the world.
Discussing Sergei Lavrov will be for another newscast. And what he represents.
Yeah, a very long-standing, very astute player of the international political game, the Russian foreign minister. Now, the Chagos Islands. This is a potential area for significant and serious disagreement between London and Washington, and yet that didn't seem to happen. Who would like to explain? I think it's you, Mr. James Landale.
Okay,
the Chagos Islands. But what is the backstory?
Yeah, look, this is complicated, so forgive me, and I'll have a good go.
Make it nice and simple.
Okay,
make it simple.
There are a bunch of islands in the middle of the Indian Ocean, whose ownership is uncertain. They were originally French, but because we duffed up the French during the Napoleonic Wars, the Brits got their hands on them. Anyway. The key point is, the reason it matters, one of the islands has a military base that is a UK-US base.
A massive military.
The problem is that a United Nations court says, actually, we think the Brits don't actually own this island anymore, these islands. We think the Mauritians do. Disputed. Lawyers can have their own say. The problem was there was legal uncertainty about it. So the Brits said, look, we've got to do something about it. We've got to cede the sovereignty and control of this to the Mauritians. Let's do a deal, but keep control of the military base, to get a lease on it, lasts for 99 years, and we'll pay some money to the Mauritians to soften the deal. Big controversy, lots of people in the Conservative Party and the Reform Party in the UK saying this is outrageous, we shouldn't be handing money to this government. We're opening these islands up. Instead of giving up control, the Chinese will come in. The British government's view is no. Because of the legal uncertainty, the risk was that you'd actually get another court judgment a proper court judgment, a stronger court judgment saying this is now not British territory. And at that point, contractors say we can't repair this military base because if we do, we'll get sued. You'll get UN agencies saying we're not going to go there.
Let's get to the deal.
The deal, and so was almost agreed, but then obviously change of administration in the United States. So basically the Brits gave it to the Americans and said, look, this is why we want to do it. Some Americans were critical, in the American administration were critical of it, but what we've seen today is the president asked about it and said that he's inclined to back the British government position.
Because it's for over 100 years, he said. It's
140.
140. Okay.
Inclined to back it, a 140-year deal. He's talking about. Can I make a mildly parochial
get into the
point
money.
Well, is that a big win for Starmer? That was actually my question.
Well, I was going to make.
He skated over it.
Can I answer that in my mildly parochial way?
Please, in a news night. Let's have a news night.
A news night, mildly parochial way. So as James was saying, there are elements of the Conservative Party who are saying Donald Trump is not going to go along with this. Nigel Farage got some legal advice from that Brexit lawyer, Martin Howe-Casey, in the hands of the Trump administration and saying, don't think Donald Trump will go along with this. What has happened? Donald Trump, I'm inclined to do it, though I need to see the details. And this is really interesting because on the night of Donald Trump's inauguration, I spoke to a member of the cabinet and I said, look, how's it going? Is it a little bit awkward? And they said, well, let's tighten the seatbelts, brace in for a ride. And they made the following predictions. One, Keir Starmer would get to see Donald Trump pretty quickly, around about a month. Tick, that happened. Peter Mandelson would be approved as ambassador to the United States. Tick, that happened. Number 3, this person said, Donald Trump will weigh it up, won't be wildly keen, but the judgment is he will go for the Chagos Island deals. The 3 predictions from that cabinet minister, which elements of the Conservative Party and elements of the Reform Party were saying weren't going to happen, have happened.
So why isn't he on this newscast tonight with us?
Well, I know. You have to make do with me. I'm sorry.
So let's just take a step back here. And so far, and as we say, the visit's not over. But at this stage, what is our take on how well this is going for Sir Keir Starmer?
Let me put a little bit of, since everyone's getting into history, let's go into newscast history. When we last sat down here, when we were assessing President Macron's visit, that same place, in that seat, that hot seat, next to the fire, with President Trump, and we said, oh, how can Sir Keir Starmer compete with that? Look at the body language, the hand on the knee, the bromance. Actually, I think the general assessment was he did very well. It was warm. He intervened when he had to intervene on issues like, no, they're not low. No, we're not getting that money back to Ukraine. We gave it to Ukraine. He intervened on free speech. So he served his own British public well, I think. But he also didn't upset President Trump. What do you think?
I agree with all of that. My but is, as with the Macron visit earlier in the week, a lot of it looks good, a lot of it sounds good, and Macron said, made lots of really good noises. Again, I come back to the backstop and the security guarantee.
What did he get out of it?
We don't know the full extent yet.
The thing is you've got to step back, wait a few minutes, and let the dust settle, because quite often you have a lot of good mood music and a lot of good chat, and then you come back from it and you think, actually, what are the genuine strategic takeaways? And sometimes it's not quite as positive as you think it is.
I mean, it's very clear what sort of moment this is. I think we'd all have to agree that it's a Zhou Enlai moment. So Mao Zedong's deputy was asked, what is your assessment of the French Revolution, which of course took place in 1789? And he said, well, it's too early to tell. So I don't think we're going to wait 200 years, but it is the point.
We're discussing, but the question was,
just finish my point?
We were asked to assess the meeting, not the overall. We still have a long way to go.
You can't assess a meeting until after it happens.
Yes.
Because what happened with the Emmanuel Macron meeting, it was fine. What happened a few hours later, up in New York, UN Security Council, the United States tables a resolution and gets Russia and China to vote for it because it doesn't recognise Russia as the aggressor. So you assess what happens, not in the room, outside.
The world order has changed. He's not going to change the shattering of the world order. They're just trying to make the best of a very historically bad situation.
Right.
I think that's where we are.
Right. Can I make the most newscast point of the evening?
Please.
We've all been making newscast points of the evening.
Which they'll probably edit out afterwards, which is there's a revisionist school of thought that think that Zhou Enlai was thinking, he thought he was referring to the sort of revolutionary activity of students in 1968. And that that's what he thought he was referring to. But there's entire PhDs about this. There's no agreement.
I like that. That's a good point. Now,
do you think our newscasters are going to make a cup of tea now?
No,
as we have discussions about
the reason why
history.
The reason why newscasters should not make a cup of tea now is because we're going to listen to another very interesting element of this initial conversation that was publicly recorded, and it's the one that you've mentioned, Lyse, just a minute ago, and that is the issue of free speech, because the Vice President, J.D. Vance, was also in the room, and the President Trump, brought him into the conversation on the subject of free speech.
We do have, of course, a special relationship with our friends in the UK and also with some of our European allies, but we also know that there have been infringements on free speech that actually affect not just the British. Of course, what the British do in their own country is up to them, but also affect American technology companies and by extension American citizens. So that is something that we'll talk about today at lunch.
We've had free speech for a very, very long time in the United Kingdom, and it will last for a very, very long time. Well, no, I mean, certainly we wouldn't want to reach across US citizens, and we don't, and that's absolutely right. But in relation to free speech in the UK, I'm very proud of our history there.
Was that, Nick, the firmest pushback from the Prime Minister against something that happened in that room, do you think?
I think we can say that at that moment, Sir Keir Starmer found his inner Emmanuel Macron. That was a full Macronian put down, physically, the eyes absolutely looking at the Vice President and literally knocking him back. When Keir Starmer took issue with the President earlier, talking about how we'd gifted most of the money to Ukraine, picking up on the Macron point, it was a sort of a mini Macron put down. But the J.D. Vance one was full Macron.
Don't you think Sir Keir Starmer said that's his inner prosecutor, not inner Macron?
Well, he would probably say it's the inner prosecutor, but taking on the Vice President of the United States after that speech in Munich is quite a thing to do.
Here's my question about that, which is, I thought what was interesting was J.D. Vance's reference to American business, to big tech. Is what we are seeing here...
Which has nothing to do with the fact that I believe some of those big tech companies were quite keen on him becoming President of the United States.
And Elon...
President Trump also talked about the companies a lot.
Exactly.
He talks about the people in the companies when he talks about relations with Europe.
So here's my question. When we see all of this activity from the United States encouraging in some respects of the administration the far right in Europe, when we see them also criticising Europe in terms of tariffs, or indeed imposing tariffs on the European Union, when we see them criticising free speech because, as was explained there, their view is that it impinges on the ability of some big American tech companies in particular to make money, is the connecting thread running through US policy here actually the amount of money that big tech can make for America? Is it that simple and self-interested? I wonder what you think.
President Trump is a businessman. We've seen on foreign policy, on whether it comes to how to fix Gaza, as we've been discussing how to fix Ukraine, show me the money. We talked about tariffs, reciprocal tariffs. If you do it to me, I'll do it to you. That is his worldview.
I think what we saw there is an illustration of the fact that the White House's current critique of Europe is commercial as well as ideological, and we saw that in person in the Vance speech, and we saw it again in the Oval Office today. And
just briefly, James, because we're nearly finished, what should we be looking out for next in this relationship?
Trade. What ultimately does Donald Trump do in terms of tariffs, not just on the UK, but also on Europe, because the Europeans, whatever happens in Europe economically has an impact on us as well. Can the Brits get some kind of carve-out to protect the UK economy?
That was the other intervention from Keir Starmer that was very important. He said, we have a surplus. He jumped in and said, we're very different.
I'm going to go fully global. The most important thing that will happen this week is tomorrow when Volodymyr Zelensky goes to the White House. That is the most important meeting.
And if he signs the deal.
If he signs the deal, and we'll be looking out for that, and we'll be bringing it to you across all our many different BBC platforms, not least Newscast. There's going to be a lot more, obviously, as we're saying, coming out from the White House in the coming days. But for this episode, I'm saying goodbye, Lyse.
To be continued, but it's goodbye for now from Lyse.
James, thank you very much.
And it's goodbye from me.
And Nick, thank you.
Thank you.
We haven't resolved the Chinese issue.
Enough.
For a PhD thesis.
Right, bye-bye for now. Bye-bye.
Newscast.
Newscast from the BBC.